The first human vessel to arrive at Kepri Reach did not announce itself with a trumpet of light or a declaration of ancient rites. It arrived crooked, scarred, and late, emerging from folded space with a shudder that rippled across the sensor nets of every listening species within 4 astronomical units. Its hull plating was mismatched, its radiators burned dark from overuse, and its drive wake carried the unmistakable signature of a reactor pushed beyond conservative safety margins for years at a time. The watchers of Kepri Reach marked it at once as human, not because they had memorized the profile, but because only humans would still be flying something like that and call it a ship rather than a coffin. The Reach itself was a place of careful tension, a braided corridor of gravity wells and ionized currents threading between 3 yellow stars and a red dwarf that spat radiation like a living thing with a grievance. Trade passed through the Reach because it had to, because the alternative was a detour that added decades to sublight routes and consumed fuel reserves that no sane polity wanted to waste. The Reach was neutral ground in the way a cliff edge was neutral, equally ready to support or kill anyone who misstepped. It was governed by overlapping treaties, unspoken habits, and the simple fact that any large-scale violence would destabilize the gravitational harmonics and scatter everyone into lethal trajectories. When the human ship staggered into real space, it did so on a vector that intersected the exclusion halo around the central star, a violation that triggered automated warnings in a dozen languages and threat postures in a dozen more. Defense platforms rotated, their weapons cold but attentive. Pilots in sleek vessels adjusted their courses to give the newcomer room, not out of courtesy, but out of instinctive caution. Nothing was more dangerous in the Reach than an uncontrolled mass with momentum and a failing drive. On the bridge of the human vessel, Captain Mara Ilex gripped the edge of her command console and felt the vibration through her bones. The ship, which bore the name Uncounted Hands painted in flaking white across its prow, was complaining in every way it could short of screaming. Status readouts scrolled across the forward display, a cascade of amber warnings that Mara had long since learned to read as a second language. Heat bloom in the portside coil, field asymmetry in the tertiary fold stabilizer, microfractures propagating along the dorsal truss. All of it familiar, all of it manageable, provided nothing else went wrong. "Bring us down another 0.5%, she said, her voice steady despite the tremor underfoot. "I want the wake as clean as we can make it before the locals decide we are an insult." Her pilot, a lean woman named Sareth Quinn, nodded and made the adjustment with fingers that danced across worn controls. The uncounted hands responded grudgingly, like an old animal coaxed into one more burst of speed. The vibrations smoothed, not gone but tolerable. Outside, the folded geometry of transit space peeled away, revealing the starfields of the Reach in all their precarious beauty. Mara let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. She had crossed the Reach before, in younger years and on better ships, but it never lost its ability to make her pulse quicken. The stars here felt close, heavy, as if they were leaning in to listen. Somewhere out there, eyes were on them, assessing, calculating, deciding whether the arrival of a battered human freighter was a problem to be solved or an opportunity to be exploited. "Signals," said Oren Vale from the communications pit, his dark hair plastered to his forehead with sweat. "Automated warnings coming in. Standard stuff. They want us to declare intent and reduce relative velocity." Also a personal hail from a platform registered to the Trelassie Compact. Mara snorted softly. The Trelassie were fast learners and faster talkers, avian in silhouette and mercantile in spirit, with a talent for inserting themselves into any situation where profit might be extracted. "Patch the automated warnings to the compliance buffer," she said. "Open the personal hail. Let us see who wants to talk." The image that resolved above the central console was of a Trelassie broker, feathers iridescent even through the compression artifacts of the transmission. Its eyes were sharp and bright, its beak curved in what passed for a polite expression among its kind. It inclined its head, a gesture that balanced respect with superiority. "Human vessel, uncounted hands," it said, its voice a melodic rasp filtered through translation matrices. "You have entered Kepri Reach under conditions of instability. I am Speaker Vethrix of the Third Ledger. We advise you to heave to and accept guidance before you damage something of value." Mara met the broker's gaze without flinching. "Speaker Vethrix," she replied. "Captain Mara Ilex. We are already reducing velocity and aligning with the designated corridor. Our instability is within acceptable margins. We will not damage your assets." The Trelassie's feathers fluffed minutely, a sign of irritation or interest. "Your confidence is noted. Your ship's condition is also noted. The Reach is not kind to vessels that push beyond their limits. Assistance can be arranged for a consideration." "There it is," Sareth muttered under her breath. Mara allowed herself a thin smile. "We appreciate the concern. We are not seeking assistance at this time. We are transiting the Reach en route to the outer exchanges." Vethrix's eyes flicked, perhaps to data streams only it could see. "Your route suggests otherwise." "The outer exchanges are overstocked with your species' exports. The inner rings, however, are experiencing shortages. With guidance, you could reach them safely." "With guidance comes obligation," Mara said. "We prefer to manage our own obligations." The broker tilted its head. "Humans continue to be interesting. Very well, be aware that any deviation from protocol will be observed. The Reach remembers those who cause trouble." "So do we," Mara said, and cut the transmission. The bridge settled into a tense rhythm as the uncounted hands adjusted course and slid into the designated corridor, a ribbon of relative calm threaded between invisible hazards. Mara took a moment to survey her crew. They were tired, scarred, and stubborn, much like the ship itself. Each of them had chosen to be here, on this run, despite the risks and the thin margins. Each of them carried reasons that did not fit neatly into cargo manifests or contract clauses. The cargo itself sat deep in the ship's hold, cradled in shock-dampening frames and wrapped in layers of containment. It was not contraband, not in the strict sense, but it was controversial, and controversy had a way of becoming dangerous when money and fear aligned against it. The crates held fabrication arrays, medical nanoforges, and adaptive habitat modules, all designed to bootstrap failing colonies back from the brink. Humanity had built them because humanity had learned, the hard way, what it meant to be cut off and left to wither. Now they sold them, traded them, and sometimes gave them away, depending on who was asking and why. The Reach was full of species who had not learned that lesson yet, or who had learned it and decided it was cheaper to let others suffer. Mara had seen both, and she knew which kind worried her more. "Captain," Oren said quietly, "we are getting passive scans from multiple vectors. Some are curious, some are not." Mara nodded. "Keep an eye on it. No aggressive responses unless they cross the line." "Acknowledged." As the uncounted hands glided deeper into the Reach, the background hum of space took on a different quality. The gravitational currents here tugged and twisted, a complex dance that required constant adjustment. The ship's artificial intelligence, an old system with layers of human intuition hard-coded into its decision trees, worked in concert with Sareth's hands and Mara's judgment. It was not elegant, but it was resilient, and resilience was a human specialty. They were halfway through the corridor when the first real problem announced itself. Not with an alarm, but with a subtle shift in the stars ahead, a distortion that Mara felt more than saw. Her instincts flared. "Status," she said. "Gravimetric anomaly," Sareth replied, fingers flying. "Localized shear developing ahead of us. That is not on the charts." "Is it moving?" "Yes, toward the corridor. Slowly, but it is growing." Oren looked up from his console, eyes wide. "I am seeing energy spikes consistent with a drive failure. Someone came out of fold too close to the red dwarf." Mara cursed under her breath. "Can we skirt it?" Sareth shook her head. Not without pushing the coils harder than they can take. We could ride it through, but it will be rough. Rough we can handle, Mara said. Catastrophic we cannot. Any other options? There is another ship, Oren said. Ahead of us, smaller. They are dead in space, caught in the developing shear. Mara's jaw tightened. The Reach remembered troublemakers, Vethrix had said. It also remembered those who let others die when they could have helped. Species, non-human, Oren said. Configuration suggests Kethari. Mara closed her eyes for a heartbeat. The Kethari were lithoid beings, slow to reproduce and slower to forgive. They were also not particularly fond of humans, viewing their rapid expansion and relentless adaptability as a kind of cosmic vulgarity. Saving one of their ships would not earn humanity universal praise, but letting it be torn apart in the Reach would certainly be remembered. Time to failure, Mara asked. Minutes, Sarath said. Less if the shear accelerates. Mara made her decision. Bring us in. We will take the shear on our forward field and extend a tether. Oren, broadcast our intent on all channels. No weapons, no claims. We are rendering aid. Oren hesitated. Captain, the platforms will see this as interference. They will see us as humans doing what we do, Mara said. Send it. The uncounted hands angled toward the anomaly, its hull groaning as the gravitational forces increased. The forward field flared, light bending around the ship in shimmering arcs. Mara felt the strain through the deck, a deep, bone-aching pressure that made her teeth buzz. Easy, she murmured, as much to the ship as to her crew. The Kethari vessel came into view, a jagged mass of dark crystal and glowing fissures, tumbling slowly as the shear pulled at it. Its drive core was venting energy in uncontrolled bursts, each one feeding the growing anomaly. They were locked in a feedback loop that would end in disintegration. Tether ready, Sarath said, but the shear is destabilizing the field. We do not have time for perfect, Mara said. Deploy. The tether shot out, a braided filament of force and matter that anchored itself to the Kethari hull. The moment it connected, the uncounted hands lurched, the added mass and conflicting vectors straining every system. Field integrity dropping, Sarath warned. Port coil temperature rising. Reroute power from non-essential systems, Mara said. All hands brace. The ship shuddered violently as the shear surged, a wave of distorted space that slammed into their forward field. Alarms finally screamed, red and insistent. Mara gripped the console harder, her knuckles white. Captain, Oren shouted over the noise. Incoming transmissions. The platforms are ordering us to disengage. Mara did not look away from the sight ahead, where the Kethari vessel hung in the grip of forces that would tear it apart if left unchecked. Tell them we are committed. We will accept liability for any damage. That is a significant concession, Oren said. So is letting someone die when we can prevent it, Mara replied. Send it. The seconds stretched, each one a battle between the shear's pull and the uncounted hands, stubborn refusal to yield. The artificial intelligence adjusted fields and vectors in real time, making thousands of micro-decisions guided by human priorities encoded long ago. Preserve life. Adapt. Endure. Then, with a wrenching lurch that sent Mara sprawling against her harness, the shear collapsed. The energy spikes flattened, the gravitational distortion smoothing out as the feedback loop broke. The Kethari vessel stabilized, its tumble slowing to a manageable drift. For a moment, there was only the sound of strained systems cooling and the ragged breathing of the crew. We have them, Sarath said, disbelief creeping into her voice. Field is holding, barely. Mara pushed herself upright, pain flaring in her shoulder. She ignored it. Good work. Maintain position. Oren, open a channel to the Kethari. Let them know they are safe. Oren nodded, his hands shaking as he worked. The image that appeared above the console was of a Kethari, its crystalline form shot through with cracks that glowed faintly. Its voice, when it spoke, was slow and resonant, the translator struggling to keep up. Human vessel, it said. We did not expect this. Mara met its gaze. Neither did we. Your drive failure created a hazard. We intervened to prevent loss of life. Are you able to accept a tow? The Kethari considered this, its internal light shifting. Assistance is noted. We will accept under protest. Mara smiled faintly. That is the best kind. As the uncounted hands began the delicate process of towing the damaged vessel out of the corridor, Mara allowed herself a moment of reflection. This was how humanity had survived its own dark corridors, by reaching out when it would have been easier to turn away, by taking on burdens that others would not. It was messy, expensive, and often thankless, but it had carried them from a single fragile world to the stars. The Reach would remember this moment, not because treaties demanded it, but because stories traveled faster than ships. Somewhere, Speaker Vethrix was recalculating ledgers. Somewhere, defense platforms were revising threat assessments. Somewhere, a Cathari would remember the feel of a human tether holding against the pull of oblivion. Mara looked out at the stars and felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. This was only the beginning. The Reach had a way of testing those who passed through it, and humanity had never been one to shy away from tests, especially when the cost of failure was counted in lives rather than profit. The aftermath of the rescue stretched longer than the rescue itself, a slow unwinding of tension that left everyone aboard the uncounted hands hollowed out and alert at the same time. The ship drifted at the edge of the corridor, towing the wounded Cathari vessel with a care that bordered on reverence, while the surrounding traffic adjusted around them like water around a stubborn stone. Defense platforms held position, their attention no longer sharp with threat, but heavy with scrutiny. In the Reach, nothing was free of consequence, and every action became part of a ledger written not only in data, but in memory. Mara remained on the bridge, refusing the quiet insistence of fatigue that pressed behind her eyes. She watched the readouts as if, by doing so, she could will them into stability. The port coil temperature eased down from its dangerous peak, settling into a range that suggested survival rather than comfort. Microfractures along the dorsal truss stopped propagating, their growth arrested by emergency field reinforcement. The uncounted hands had taken a beating, but it was a beating she had anticipated when she gave the order. The ship had endured worse. Platforms are backing off, Oren said, breaking the heavy silence. No further orders to disengage. They are issuing a general advisory about anomalous conditions, crediting our intervention with stabilization. Mara nodded. Translation for "we made their job easier and made ourselves very visible," Sareth added, her eyes still locked on the flight controls. Everyone in the Reach will know who pulled a Cathari out of a shear. That was going to happen the moment we extended the tether, Mara said. Visibility is not always a liability. Sareth glanced at her, one eyebrow raised. It is when half the species here would rather see us fail. Mara allowed herself a thin smile. Then we give them fewer reasons to cheer. The Cathari vessel transmitted a status update, its systems stabilizing enough to accept limited external power. The lithoid captain's image flickered into view again, its crystalline facets now threaded with steadier light. It inclined its massive head, a gesture that carried weight in Cathari culture. "We are functional," it said. "Your intervention prevented fragmentation. This will be recorded." Mara met its gaze. "We will tow you to the nearest service ring. From there, arrangements can be made." The Cathari considered this. "We have resources, we will compensate." "Compensation is not required," Mara said evenly, "but if you insist, we will discuss terms once everyone is safe." The Cathari's internal light pulsed. Humans continue to defy efficient categorization. "We have heard that before," Mara replied. The channel closed, leaving the bridge filled once more with the low hum of systems and the unspoken thoughts of the crew. Sareth finally leaned back in her seat, rolling her shoulders with a wince. "That took years off my life," she said. Mara huffed softly. "You will get them back in stories. If we live long enough to tell them," Sareth replied. They did not speak of the other possibility, the one that always hovered at the edges of deep space work. Instead, they focused on the present, on the slow, careful transit toward the service ring that clung to the gravitational balance point between two of the Reach's stars. It was a place built by consensus and necessity, a lattice of habitats and docks maintained by shared interest rather than shared ideology. No one owned it outright, which meant everyone claimed a piece. As they approached, the density of traffic increased. Ships of every configuration slid past, their hulls bearing markings that spoke of origins light years apart. Some slowed, adjusting course to get a better look at the human freighter and its unusual tow. Others kept their distance, wary of proximity to a vessel that had just wrestled with a gravitational anomaly and won. "Incoming hail," Oren said. "Speaker Vethrix again." Mara sighed. "Of course it is. Put them through." The Trelasi broker appeared, feathers sleeked close to its body in what passed for professional composure. Its eyes glittered with something that might have been admiration or might have been calculation. "Captain Mara Ilex," Vethrix said, "your actions have caused discussion." "I imagine they have," Mara replied. "If you are calling to reprimand us, you are late." "On the contrary," Vethrix said, "the platforms have updated their assessment. Your intervention reduced potential damage to shared infrastructure. This is viewed favorably. There are, however, secondary effects." "Such as?" Mara prompted. "The Kethari do not forget debts," Vethrix said, "nor do they forgive slights. By saving one of their vessels, you have inserted yourself into their narratives." "This has value." Mara folded her arms. "If you are about to offer to broker that value, spare us the pitch." Vethrix's beak twitched. "Efficiency is appreciated. Very well. There are interests within the Reach that would prefer humans remain marginal participants. Your visibility complicates their projections. They may seek to test you." "Test how?" Mara asked. Vethrix leaned closer to the transmission field. "Through pressure, through offers that are difficult to refuse, through obstacles placed where failure can be plausibly attributed to your own recklessness." Mara smiled without humor. "That sounds familiar." "You should consider securing allies," Vethrix said. "The Trelasi Compact is open to negotiation." "Everything is open to negotiation with you," Mara said. "We will keep it in mind." The broker inclined its head again. "Prudence is a rare commodity until our next exchange." The image vanished, leaving behind a bridge full of unspoken implications. Oren was the first to voice them. "They are circling," he said. "Not just the Trelasi, others will follow." Mara nodded. "They always do." "That is the price of doing something that matters." The service ring loomed ahead, its lights a complex pattern that marked docking lanes and habitation clusters. The uncounted hands eased into position, handing off the Kethari vessel to specialized tugs designed to handle lithoid mass without inducing stress fractures. As the tether disengaged, Mara felt a subtle shift in the ship's balance, a release of tension that left her unexpectedly lightheaded. "Docking clearance granted," Sarath said. "Assigned berth is 12 Gamma." "Bring us in," Mara said. The docking process was smooth, a testament to the ring's neutral protocols and the skill of its operators. Once the clamps engaged and the pressure seals held, Mara allowed herself to stand down. She unstrapped and stretched, her joints protesting the movement. "Take a break," she told the crew. "Eat something that is not nutrient-paced. We will reconvene in 2 hours." They did not argue. Fatigue rolled off them in waves as they dispersed, each seeking their own version of rest. Mara lingered on the bridge a moment longer, looking out through the forward viewport at the chaotic beauty of the Reach. She wondered how many stories intersected here, how many quiet decisions shaped the flow of history in ways that would never make it into official records. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft chime from her personal console. A message indicator blinked, marked with a priority code she did not recognize. She frowned and opened it. The message was brief, encoded, and unmistakably human. "We saw what you did. Meet us at Habitat Ring 3, Sector 9. There is more at stake than you know." Mara stared at the text, her pulse quickening. She ran a quick diagnostic, confirming the encryption signature. It was old, predating the more standardized protocols adopted after humanity's first interstellar treaties. That alone narrowed the field to a small subset of groups who still valued autonomy over integration. Interesting, she murmured. 2 hours later, refreshed but still wary, Mara made her way through the service ring's corridors. Habitat Ring 3 was a place of layered compromises, its architecture a patchwork of design philosophies stitched together by necessity. Gravity varied subtly from section to section, tuned to the preferences of its inhabitants. Scents shifted as well, from mineral tangs to humid organics to sterile recycled air. Sector 9 lay at the intersection of several habitation zones, a place where traffic flowed but rarely lingered. The meeting point specified in the message was a public overlook, a curved balcony that offered a view of the inner star and the steady ballet of ships passing through the reach. Mara arrived early, positioning herself near the railing with a clear view of the approaches. She kept her posture relaxed, her awareness anything but. The reach had taught her that danger rarely announced itself loudly. The first sign that she was not alone was a subtle shift in the ambient noise, a dampening that suggested localized field manipulation. She turned slowly, her hand resting casually near the concealed sidearm she carried more out of habit than expectation. 3 figures approached, the gait unmistakably human despite the varied augmentations visible beneath their clothing. They wore no insignia, no overt markers of affiliation. Their faces were lined, their eyes sharp. The one in the center inclined his head. "Captain Mara Ilex," he said, "thank you for coming." "Your message was intriguing," Mara replied. "You have my attention." "That is fortunate," he said, "because attention is what we need." "Who are you?" Mara asked. "We are a coalition," he said, "of colonies, fleets, and interests that have found themselves on the wrong side of interstellar convenience. We call ourselves the Periphery Accord." Mara raised an eyebrow. "That name has not reached official channels." "That is by design," he said. "Official channels are easily influenced. Everything is easily influenced if you push hard enough," Mara said. "Why contact me?" "Because you just demonstrated something," he replied. "You demonstrated that humans still act even when it is inconvenient, that you are willing to incur risk for reasons that cannot be reduced to immediate profit." Mara studied him. "You could have learned that from history. History is often dismissed as anomaly," he said. "Current action is harder to ignore." "Flattery aside," Mara said, "what do you want?" The man gestured toward the stars beyond the viewport. "The reach is a fulcrum. Control it, influence it, and you shape the flow of resources across a dozen sectors. There are forces moving to consolidate that control under the guise of stability. They will marginalize those who do not fit their projections. And you want humans to oppose this," Mara said. "We want humans to complicate it," he corrected, "to remain unpredictable, to provide options where none appear to exist." Mara leaned back against the railing. "That is a dangerous request." "Yes," he agreed, "which is why we are not making demands. We are offering information." He nodded to one of his companions, who stepped forward and projected a holographic display into the air between them. It showed a web of trade routes, energy flows, and political alignments, overlaid with markers that pulsed ominously. "Within the next cycle," the man said, "a consortium of major powers will propose new safety regulations for the reach. They will cite recent anomalies as justification. These regulations will impose transit fees, mandatory escorts, and infrastructure control that will effectively lock out smaller operators." Mara's jaw tightened, "including independent human vessels." "Including any who cannot afford compliance," he said, "or who refuse to cede autonomy. And you believe we can stop this?" Mara said. "We believe you can disrupt it," he replied. "Delay it, expose its consequences, perhaps even reshape it." Mara considered the display, her mind racing. "Why bring this to me? There are larger human fleets." "They are already entangled," he said. "Bound by treaties and dependencies, you are less constrained." "Because we are smaller," Mara said. "Because you are stubborn," he countered. Mara laughed softly, a short bark of sound that surprised even her. "You are not wrong." The man inclined his head again. "We do not ask for an answer now, only that you consider the weight of what you have already done. The Reach is watching, so are we. The field dampening lifted as subtly as it had arrived. The three figures turned and melted back into the flow of the habitat ring, leaving Mara alone with the stars and the echo of possibility. She remained there for a long moment, staring at the holographic afterimage burned into her thoughts. The Uncounted Hands was a freighter, not a warship. Its crew were traders, engineers, and survivors, not soldiers. And yet time and again, humanity had found itself at the center of conflicts not because it sought power, but because it refused to look away. When she finally returned to the ship, she gathered her senior crew in the common area, a space worn smooth by years of shared meals and shared decisions. They listened as she recounted the encounter, their expressions shifting from fatigue to concern to grim interest. "They want us to poke the nest," Sareth said when Mara finished. "Hard. They want us to keep being ourselves," Oren said quietly. Mara looked around the table, meeting each gaze in turn. "I will not pretend this is without risk. But after what we did today, pretending we can stay invisible would be dishonest." Silence settled, not empty but weighted. Finally, Sareth nodded. "We did not sign on to hide." Oren took a breath. If the Reach is changing, better to have a hand on the lever than be crushed under it. Mara felt a familiar warmth spread through her chest, the quiet certainty that came from shared purpose. "Then we proceed carefully," she said. "We gather information, we choose our moments, and we remember why we fly this ship." Outside, the Reach continued its endless dance, unaware or unconcerned with the small decisions unfolding within its bounds. But somewhere in its currents, the gravity of Uncounted Hands was beginning to shift, pulled by human resolve and the stubborn refusal to let the future be decided without them. The days that followed were marked by a peculiar tension that threaded itself through every routine aboard the Uncounted Hands. On the surface, nothing had changed. Cargo manifests were reviewed, minor hull repairs scheduled, supply contracts negotiated with the same cautious pragmatism that had kept the ship solvent through lean cycles. Beneath that veneer of normalcy, however, every member of the crew felt the subtle acceleration of events, the sense that the Reach itself was drawing a slow breath before speaking. Mara slept poorly. When she did sleep, she dreamed of gravitational tides made visible, vast currents sweeping ships and worlds alike toward unseen anchors. She woke with clenched hands and the echo of responsibility humming through her nerves. Each morning she rose before the ship's artificial dawn, walking the length of the Uncounted Hands, listening to its familiar sounds. The ship responded to her presence with small adjustments, pressure changes, and field calibrations that spoke of an intelligence grown intimate with human habits. It had been built by people who expected to push limits, and it showed. The first concrete sign that the Periphery Accord's warning was more than speculation came on the fourth day, during a routine exchange with the service ring's logistics office. Oren returned from the negotiation suite with his jaw set and his datapad gripped too tightly. "They are changing the rules," he said without preamble, dropping into a chair across from Mara in the common area. "Incrementally, but it is there." Mara looked up from her own console. "How so?" "New compliance advisories," Oren replied, "framed as voluntary best practices, enhanced monitoring during transit, priority lanes for vessels registered with recognized consortiums." "And we are not recognized," Mara said. "Not unless we submit to oversight that effectively hands them our operational data," Oren said. "Routes, cargo types, contacts, everything." Mara leaned back, exhaling slowly, soft pressure. "Exactly," Oren said. "No single demand egregious enough to provoke backlash, just enough friction to make independence expensive." Sareth, who had been listening from the adjacent workstation, swiveled her chair around. "We can still fly," she said. "It will just hurt more." "They are counting on attrition," Mara said, "on the idea that eventually it will be easier to comply than resist." Sareth snorted. "They do not know us very well." Mara smiled faintly, then sobered. "Stubbornness alone will not be enough. we need leverage. Information, Oren said immediately. If we can show what these changes will do to smaller operators, to marginal species, to the flow of aid. And allies, Sarath added, people who will speak when we cannot. Mara nodded, both, which means we need to move. They did not have to wait long for an opportunity. The Kethari vessel they had rescued, now docked in a specialized cradle along the service ring's exterior, requested a formal audience the following cycle. The request came through official channels, marked with a level of formality that suggested more than courtesy. Mara accepted. The meeting took place in a chamber designed to accommodate Kethari physiology, its walls reinforced and its atmosphere tuned to support a being whose mass and internal pressures dwarfed those of humans. Mara entered alone, a deliberate choice. The Kethari captain awaited her, its crystalline form polished and stabilized, the cracks she had seen before now sealed with careful craftsmanship. Captain Mara Ilex, it said, its voice resonating through the chamber. You have honored our request. You saved my ship, Mara replied. This seemed fair. The Kethari inclined its massive head. Our people record debts with precision. Your intervention altered probabilities in our favor. This creates obligation. Mara chose her words carefully. Obligation can take many forms. Yes, the Kethari said, we have examined the context of your action. It was not strategically optimal by prevailing models. No, Mara agreed. It was necessary. The Kethari's internal light shifted, patterns rippling through its crystalline structure. This distinction is human. Mara smiled. We have been accused of that. There was a pause, one that carried weight rather than awkwardness. Then the Kethari spoke again. The reach is changing, it said. We have detected movements among the dominant powers. Consolidation, control. So have we, Mara said. You will be disadvantaged, the Kethari continued. Your species lacks the entrenched infrastructure of others. You rely on flexibility. And flexibility is threatened by rigid control, Mara said. Correct, the Kethari said. Our interests are also threatened, though in different measure. We are few, our vessels are costly. Increased fees and oversight reduce our already narrow margins. Mara leaned forward slightly. You did not summon me to exchange observations. No, the Kethari said. We summoned you to propose reciprocity. It extended a crystalline limb toward a projection field, activating it. The display that appeared was dense with data, far more granular than what the periphery accord had shown her. It mapped not just proposed regulations, but the entities backing them, the financial flows underpinning them, and the projected impact on various species and trade networks. This information is not public, the Kethari said. We obtained it through channels unavailable to you. Mara felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. Why share it? Because obligation must be discharged, the Kethari replied, and because your unpredictability may disrupt outcomes that do not favor us. Mara absorbed the display in silence, committing as much as she could to memory. This will make enemies, she said finally. Yes, the Kethari agreed, but it will also clarify positions. Ambiguity benefits those who already hold power. Mara nodded slowly. Then we are aligned for now. For now, the Kethari echoed. When Mara returned to the uncounted hands, she brought the data with her, encrypted and partitioned to minimize risk. The crew gathered again, this time with a sharper edge to their attention. As Mara outlined what the Kethari had shared, the implications unfolded like a tightening net. They are not just targeting independence, Oren said, scrolling through projections. They are engineering dependencies. If you want access to medical lanes, to repair hubs, you comply, and if you do not, Sarath said, you get rerouted into dangerous space and then blamed when something goes wrong. Mara nodded. They are weaponizing safety. So what do we do? Sarath asked. We cannot outgun them. No, Mara said, but we can outmaneuver them. The plan that emerged over the next hours was not elegant, but it was very human. They would leverage the uncounted hands, reputation, recent actions, and existing contacts to move through the reach in ways that highlighted the consequences of the proposed changes. They would carry aid where it would be delayed or denied under the new framework. They would document everything, gathering testimony and data from those affected, and when the time came, they would make it impossible to pretend that consolidation was neutral. "We will be walking a line," Oren said. "One misstep and we will be labeled agitators." "Or worse," Sareth added. Mara met their gazes. "We already are in some eyes. The difference is whether we choose to act with intent or let others define us." The first test of that intent came sooner than expected. A request arrived from a marginal habitat cluster on the Reach's periphery, a place known as Tharlow's Drift. It housed a mixed population, many of them displaced by earlier trade realignments. Its medical infrastructure was failing, and a shipment of nanoforges similar to those in the Uncounted Hands hold had been delayed indefinitely due to compliance disputes. "They are asking if we can deliver," Oren said. Unofficially, Mara did not hesitate, plot a course. The route to Tharlow's Drift was deliberately inconvenient, threading through less stable regions of the Reach that larger consortium vessels avoided unless heavily compensated. The Uncounted Hands took it anyway, its systems humming with familiar strain. Along the way, they encountered increased scrutiny. Patrol craft requested inspections. Automated systems flagged their transponder more frequently. Each time, Mara complied just enough to avoid escalation, documenting every delay, every added requirement. When they arrived at Tharlow's Drift, the contrast with the gleaming service ring was stark. The habitat cluster was a patchwork of modules, some decades old, others jury-rigged from salvaged hulls. Its rotation was uneven, gravity fluctuating in ways that made Mara's stomach lurch as they docked. The people who greeted them were wary but hopeful, their faces etched with the quiet desperation of those used to being overlooked. The local coordinator, a woman whose accent bore traces of multiple worlds, clasped Mara's hands with trembling intensity. "You came," she said. "They said you might." "We said we would," Mara replied. Unloading the nanoforges took hours, the crew working alongside Tharlow's Drift's residents to integrate the systems into existing infrastructure. Mara watched as the first diagnostic cycles completed, green indicators blooming across interfaces that had been dark for too long. The relief in the air was palpable, a release of tension that brought tears to more than one set of eyes. "This would not have been possible under the new guidelines," the coordinator said quietly, standing beside Mara as they observed the process. "They said we were too small, too risky." Mara felt a familiar anger stir. "You are not." The return trip was tense. A patrol intercepted them midway, citing irregularities in their cargo documentation. The exchange was civil, but the message was clear. They were being watched, measured, tested. By the time the Uncounted Hands docked again at the service ring, word of their delivery had spread. Messages filtered in, some cautious, some urgent, all from places that feared being left behind by a Reach reshaped for convenience rather than survival. Mara stood on the bridge, watching the traffic flow past, feeling the weight of those Uncounted Hands pressing at her back. Humanity had never been the largest force in the stars. It had never been the most unified. But it had learned, again and again, that when systems grew too rigid, when power concentrated at the expense of resilience, something fragile and essential was lost. She did not know how the coming cycles would end. She only knew that the Reach was no longer a neutral passage, and that by choosing to act, they had stepped fully into its gravity. Pressure did not arrive all at once. It seeped in through channels that had once been routine, altering tone before content, implication before mandate. The Uncounted Hands found its docking requests subject to longer review. Fuel contracts came back with amended clauses. Even casual conversations in shared corridors carried a new wariness, eyes lingering a fraction too long before sliding away. The Reach was not closing its fist yet, but its fingers were curling. Mara felt it most acutely in the silences between messages. Responses that once arrived within hours now took days. Some never came at all. The absence of refusal was its own language, one she had learned long ago in places where power preferred not to dirty itself with open confrontation. They were 3 transits out from Tharlow's drift when the first overt obstacle manifested. The uncounted hands emerged from folded space into a monitored junction and was immediately bracketed by patrol craft bearing the markings of a newly formed oversight collective. Their hulls were sleek, modular, clearly designed for rapid adaptation. Not warships, but close enough to make a point. "Incoming directive," Oren said, his voice carefully neutral. "They are ordering us to power down and submit to a comprehensive inspection." Mara studied the sensor display. "Under what authority?" "Emergency Transit Safety Regulation Alpha," Oren replied. "Recently ratified." "Of course it was," Sareth muttered. Mara considered her options. Open defiance would escalate quickly. Compliance would cost them time and expose operational details they preferred to keep opaque. "Acknowledge," she said finally, "but request clarification on scope and duration." Oren transmitted the response. The reply came back almost immediately, a sign that the patrol had been waiting. "Full access," Oren read. "Indefinite duration pending review." Sareth let out a low whistle. "That is not an inspection, that is an impoundment." Mara nodded. "They want to see if we will flinch." She opened a channel to the patrol leader, a figure whose species Mara recognized as one of the Reach's bureaucratic stalwarts, known for patience and procedural exactness. "This is Captain Mara Ilex of the Uncounted Hands," she said. "We acknowledge your directive. However, we are currently carrying time-sensitive humanitarian cargo under existing contracts. An indefinite delay would constitute material harm." The patrol leader's image resolved, its expression unreadable. "Your concern is noted. However, safety supersedes convenience." "Safety is best served by transparency," Mara replied. "If there are specific concerns, state them. We will address them." "There are patterns," the patrol leader said. "Your vessel has been involved in multiple anomalous events, intervention in hazardous conditions, unscheduled deliveries to marginal habitats. These increase systemic risk." Mara felt the familiar heat of anger rise, but she kept her voice even. "Lives are not anomalies. Intent is not under review," the patrol leader said. "Impact is." "Then measure the full impact," Mara said, "including the cost of delay." There was a pause longer than before. Data flickered across the patrol leader's display, unseen by Mara, but implied by the slight shift in posture. "Inspection duration will be limited to 1 standard cycle," the patrol leader said finally. "Non-compliance will result in sanctions." Mara inclined her head. "We will cooperate within that framework." The patrol disengaged its weapons posture, but the tension did not fully dissipate. As the inspection teams docked, Mara set the crew to their roles, each aware that this was as much theater as procedure. They answered questions honestly but concisely, offered documentation without volunteering context, and maintained a calm that belied the stakes. The inspection lasted the full cycle. Systems were scanned, cargo manifests cross-referenced, crew backgrounds reviewed with uncomfortable thoroughness. When it was over, the patrol withdrew with minimal comment, leaving behind a ship that was technically cleared and practically flagged. "That was a warning," Sareth said once they were alone again. "Yes," Mara agreed, "and a probe." "They did not find anything actionable," Oren added, "but they mapped us." "They already had," Mara said. "This was about reminding us." The reminder came with consequences. Over the next several transits, access fees increased. Preferred lanes were denied without explanation. A request from another peripheral habitat was quietly rerouted to a consortium carrier that arrived weeks later with reduced supplies and increased costs. "They are trying to starve the behavior," Oren said, reviewing the latest updates. "Make our example unsustainable." "Then we make the starvation visible," Mara replied. They began compiling their records into a comprehensive archive. Every delay, every added fee, Every Denid request was logged alongside its real-world effects. Medical treatments postponed, structural failures exacerbated, lives disrupted not by accident but by policy. The archive grew quickly, a dense tapestry of cause and consequence. They were not alone in this effort. Messages filtered in from other independents, some human, some not, sharing similar experiences. A loose network formed, bound not by formal agreement but by shared frustration and a dawning realization that isolation was no longer survivable. One message stood out among the rest, its origin encrypted and its tone urgent. They are accelerating. The proposal will be formalized at the Convergence Assembly. If it passes, reversal will be nearly impossible. The Convergence Assembly was a rare gathering, convened only when matters of reach-wide significance demanded collective deliberation. Attendance was by invitation, weighted heavily toward established powers. Independents were rarely granted a voice. "Do we have standing?" Sareth asked when Mara shared the message. "Not officially," Mara said, "but that has never stopped humans before. Getting to the assembly was its own challenge. The venue, a massive construct anchored at a stable gravitational node, was surrounded by layers of controlled space. Transit permissions were tightly regulated. The Uncounted Hands request was denied twice before being accepted with conditions that bordered on insulting. "They want us there," Oren said after reviewing the acceptance. "On their terms. They want to see what we do," Mara replied. The approach to the assembly was a study in contrasts. Massive capital vessels glided with practiced ease, their hulls pristine, their escorts numerous. The Uncounted Hands, scarred and mismatched, drew more than a few glances as it took its assigned approach vector, far from the central berths. Inside, the assembly chamber was vast, its design accommodating a staggering diversity of forms. Delegations occupied designated zones, their presence marked by holographic sigils and subtle field adjustments. Mara felt small as she entered, acutely aware of the weight of history pressing down on the space. She was not given a seat. Instead, she was directed to an observation tier, a polite marginalization that spoke volumes. "Figures," Sareth muttered beside her. "Observe first," Mara said quietly. "We speak when it matters." The proceedings began with the presentation of the new safety framework, delivered in tones of measured concern and shared responsibility. Projections showed graphs trending toward stability, risk reduction, efficiency. The language was careful, inclusive on the surface, exclusionary in effect. As the presentation continued, Mara activated the archive, cross-referencing claims with lived outcomes. Each assertion of safety was undercut by a data point of harm, each promise of efficiency mapped to a bottleneck that favored those already resourced. When the floor opened for questions, Mara waited. Delegates spoke, some probing, most perfunctory. The momentum was clear. Approval was expected. Then a Cathari delegation requested recognition. The chamber shifted subtly as attention turned. The Cathari speaker, its crystalline presence commanding by sheer mass and resonance, addressed the assembly with deliberate slowness. "We have reviewed the proposed framework," it said. "Our analysis indicates disproportionate impact on low-margin operators and marginal habitats." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. "Furthermore," the Cathari continued, "we have first-hand evidence that alternative approaches to risk mitigation exist, approaches grounded in mutual aid rather than centralized control." Mara felt Sareth's sharp intake of breath. The Cathari gestured, and the archive flared into visibility across the chamber, its data anonymized but unmistakable. Delays, denials, consequences laid bare. "This data was compiled by an independent human vessel," the Cathari said, "the Uncounted Hands." All eyes turned toward the observation tier. Mara stepped forward, her heart pounding but her posture steady. "We did not set out to oppose this assembly," she said, her voice carrying through the chamber. "We set out to do our work, to deliver aid, to respond when lives were at risk. The obstacles we encountered were not incidental, they were systemic. A delegate rose, its tone sharp. You are an outlier, anecdote is not policy. Mara met its gaze. Then examine the pattern, we are not alone. As if on cue, additional data streams activated, contributions from other independents, other species. The tapestry expanded, too broad to dismiss as coincidence. This framework prioritizes predictability over resilience, Mara continued. But the reach is not predictable, it is dynamic. It survives because those who move through it adapt, respond, and sometimes take risks that cannot be pre-approved. Silence settled, heavy and charged. You fear instability, Mara said. So do we, but there is a difference between managing risk and erasing those who bear it. The assembly recessed without a vote, an outcome few had anticipated. Debate erupted inside channels, alliances recalculating in real time. The proposal was not dead, but it was wounded. When Mara returned to the uncounted hands, exhaustion hit her like a physical blow. She sank into a chair in the common area, head in her hands. That was something, Sarath said softly. That was a beginning, Mara replied. Outside, the reach continued its endless motion, but the currents had shifted. Not enough to claim victory, not enough to rest. Enough to prove that even in spaces dominated by massive forces and entrenched interests, uncounted hands could still grasp the future and pull. After the assembly, the reach did not snap back into equilibrium. It wobbled. Decisions deferred created vacuums, and vacuums invited motion. The proposal that had seemed inevitable fractured into competing revisions, each claiming to address the exposed flaws while quietly preserving advantage for its sponsors. The language grew denser, the meetings more frequent, the backchannels louder. Nothing had been resolved, and that uncertainty was its own kind of pressure. For the uncounted hands, the immediate effect was paradoxical. Official scrutiny eased slightly as no single authority wanted to provoke another public challenge. Unofficial pressure intensified. Contracts evaporated without explanation. Fuel suppliers demanded advance payment. Dockworkers delayed maintenance by just enough to be deniable. The ship was being squeezed, not crushed, tested to see how long it could function under constant friction. Mara felt the toll in small ways. Her patience shortened. Her dreams returned, heavier now, threaded with voices arguing in languages she did not know. She spent more time alone, reviewing data, tracing connections, looking for leverage that did not rely on confrontation alone. Humanity had survived not just by pushing, but by finding cracks and widening them quietly. The cracks appeared in unexpected places. A message arrived from a mid-tier consortium, one that had publicly supported the safety framework, but privately depended on independent carriers to service its less profitable routes. The message was cautiously worded, stripped of anything that could be used against its sender if intercepted. We require discreet transport services, terms negotiable, no official record. Mara read it twice, then forwarded it to Oren and Sarath. They are hedging, Sarath said after a moment. Public loyalty, private necessity, which means leverage, Oren added. If we move their cargo, we remind them what they lose if independents disappear. Mara nodded, and if we refuse, they will find someone else and learn nothing. They accepted the contract, negotiating terms that included not just payment, but access. Access to internal assessments, to traffic projections, to the quiet acknowledgements that the reach's complexity could not be managed by centralized decree alone. The run itself was uneventful, a deliberate choice by the consortium to avoid further spectacle. The uncounted hands slipped through secondary corridors, delivering high-value components to a remote fabrication hub that would have been deprioritized under the proposed framework. The hub's administrators did not ask questions. They did not need to. On the return transit, Mara convened the crew in the common area again. The table between them was cluttered with datapads and half-finished meals, the familiar chaos of shared labor. We are being courted, Oren said, quietly, and watched, Sarath added, more closely than ever. Yes, Mara said, which means we need to decide what we are becoming. They looked at her, expressions intent. We started as a freighter, Mara continued. We still are. But we are also a signal now. People project meaning onto us, whether we invite it or not. So what do we invite? Sarath asked. Mara took a breath. Coordination, not command. We do not build another hierarchy, we build pathways. Oren frowned slightly. That sounds vague. Intentionally, Mara said. Rigid structures are easy to target. Networks are harder. They began reaching out, not with grand declarations, but with offers of shared resources. Information exchanges, mutual support agreements that did not require allegiance, only transparency. If one vessel was delayed, others adjusted. If a habitat was deprioritized, multiple carriers took turns filling the gap. Redundancy emerged organically, a living system growing in the spaces left by centralized planning. The response was uneven. Some welcomed the approach, relieved to find solidarity without strings. Others recoiled, wary of entanglement. A few actively undermined the effort, reporting back to authorities in hopes of favor. The Reach responded in kind. A revised proposal surfaced, softer in tone, its most egregious controls diluted. It included provisions for independent operators, advisory councils, review periods. It was progress, but careful, cautious progress that preserved the possibility of later consolidation. They are buying time, Sarath said, reviewing the draft. So are we, Mara replied. The next major test came not from policy, but from crisis. A stellar flare from the red dwarf destabilized several outer habitats, knocking out power and life support in a cascade of failures. The official response was swift but constrained, prioritizing core infrastructure and high-population centers. Peripheral clusters were told to wait. They did not. Requests flooded the informal network the uncounted hands had helped nurture. Distress calls layered with urgency and fear, lives measured in hours. Mara did not hesitate. We go, she said, all of us if they will. The response was immediate. Ships altered course. Crews volunteered for extended shifts. Supplies were pooled and redistributed on the fly. No single vessel could handle the scale of the disaster, but together they formed a moving web of aid, slipping through gaps in official coverage. The uncounted hands took on a coordinating role by necessity, its crew relaying information, matching needs to capacities. Mara barely left the bridge, her voice hoarse as she directed traffic and negotiated passage through increasingly crowded space. At one point, a patrol attempted to reroute them, citing safety concerns. Mara opened a channel, exhaustion sharpening her words. Every minute you delay us costs lives, she said. If you intend to enforce this, do it openly. The patrol withdrew. By the time the flare subsided and power was restored across the outer habitats, the unofficial network had reached places the official response never touched. Casualties were fewer than projected. Damage was mitigated. Stories spread, carried by those who had been helped when no one else came. The aftermath was messy. Accusations flew. Credit was contested. Committees formed to study the response. Through it all, one fact remained inconveniently clear. The decentralized effort had worked. The Convergence Assembly reconvened sooner than planned. This time, Mara was offered a seat. She accepted, though she knew the symbolism mattered as much as any formal recognition. The debate that followed was sharper, less assured. Delegates referenced the flare response repeatedly, some praising it, others framing it as reckless. Mara listened, then spoke when acknowledged. You cannot legislate resilience, she said. You can only enable it. The Reach survives because it contains multitudes, because when one approach fails, another can take its place. A delegate leaned forward, and if that plurality undermines cohesion. Then cohesion was brittle, Mara replied. The revised framework that emerged did not abolish oversight, but it limited its reach. Independent corridors were preserved. Emergency response protocols were expanded to include non-consortium actors. Advisory roles were formalized, giving marginal voices a channel that did not require assimilation. It was not everything Mara wanted. It was enough to matter. When the uncounted hands finally departed the assembly, its hull newly scarred from hard use, Mara stood on the bridge and watched the structure recede into the distance. "We are not done," Sareth said quietly. "No," Mara agreed, "but we have changed the shape of the fight." The Reach did not belong to anyone. It never had. It was a convergence of paths, a test of balance. Humanity, in all its stubborn adaptability, had once again refused to be sorted neatly, insisting instead on being present, imperfect, and engaged. The gravity of uncounted hands was not a single force. It was the cumulative weight of choices made in moments when it would have been easier to stand aside. And as long as ships like the uncounted hands kept flying, that gravity would continue to pull the future away from inevitability and toward possibility. Time did what it always did in the Reach. It smoothed the sharpest edges of conflict without erasing the scars. Weeks turned into cycles, cycles into seasons marked not by planets, but by traffic density and stellar activity. The revised framework passed, amended again and again by committees that sought balance without daring too much change. It was imperfect, riddled with loopholes and compromises, but it held. Independent corridors remained open. Emergency authority was no longer monopolized. The Reach breathed easier, if not freely. For the uncounted hands, survival returned to being complicated rather than precarious. Contracts resumed, cautiously at first, then with growing confidence as it became clear the ship was not about to be quietly erased. The network they had helped seed did not dissolve after the crisis. It adapted, becoming less visible, less centralized, and therefore harder to suppress. Ships checked in, shared alerts, rerouted around trouble. No single node mattered enough to destroy the whole. Mara welcomed that. She had never wanted permanence in her own role. Permanence calcified into authority, and authority attracted the kind of attention that eventually demanded obedience. Better to be necessary only when needed than recede. She spent more time walking the ship again, reacquainting herself with its rhythms after months of near-constant strain. The uncounted hands bore the marks of its labor openly. New welds gleamed alongside old patches. The port coil had been rebuilt twice, its hum now slightly lower in pitch, a sound Mara found oddly comforting. It was not pretty, it was functional, which was its own kind of beauty. The crew felt different too, not more confident, exactly, but more grounded. They had seen what coordinated effort could do without hierarchy dictating every move. They trusted their judgment more. They argued less about whether something should be done and more about how best to do it. That trust was tested when a message arrived from beyond the Reach entirely. The signal came in weak, stretched thin by distance and interference. Its origin point lay along a sparsely charted frontier, a region most trade routes skirted due to unstable stellar formations and the absence of reliable infrastructure. The message was fragmentary, but its core was unmistakable. Colony failing, environmental systems compromised, external assistance denied, requesting any aid, anyone. Mara read the decoded fragments in silence. The name of the colony was unfamiliar, its founding date recent enough to suggest optimism untempered by experience. It was exactly the kind of place that fell through cracks when priorities were realigned. "That is far," Sareth said quietly when Mara shared the message. "Yes," Mara replied, "and outside the Reach's immediate concern. Which means no one will stop us," Oren added. "But no one will help either," Mara nodded. "It will be just us." The decision did not require a vote, it never had, but Mara still looked around the common area, meeting each pair of eyes. "This will not be profitable," she said. "It will cost us time, fuel, and likely damage we cannot immediately repair. There will be no assembly to speak for us if something goes wrong." Sareth shrugged. "When has that ever stopped us?" Oren smiled thinly. "We did not come this far to learn how to say no." They set course. The journey beyond the Reach felt different from anything Mara had experienced in years. Traffic thinned, then vanished. Navigation required constant recalibration, as gravitational models grew unreliable. The stars felt harsher out here, less mediated by shared infrastructure and mutual interest. The uncounted hands pushed on, its systems stretched but steady. The crew fell into an old, comfortable rhythm, one born of necessity rather than oversight. They slept in shifts, ate together when they could, and spoke little unless there was something worth saying. When they arrived, the colony was worse than the message had suggested. The settlement clung to a marginal world orbiting a volatile star, its habitats half buried against radiation storms that had grown more intense than predicted. Power flickered across the surface in erratic patches. Life support was failing sector by sector, forcing evacuations into overcrowded modules. The colony's leaders met Mara via a shaky transmission, their faces drawn with exhaustion and fear. "We were told help would come," one of them said. "Then the contracts were renegotiated. Our priority was downgraded." Mara felt a familiar anger settle into something colder and more focused. "We will do what we can," she said, "but you need to understand this will take time." "We have time," the leader said. "We just do not have redundancy." Mara exchanged a glance with Sarath as the channel closed. "Then we give them some." Deploying the fabrication arrays under planetary conditions was far more complex than anything they had done before. Atmospheric interference played havoc with field stability. Local materials reacted unpredictably. The uncounted hands, crew worked alongside colonists, adapting designs on the fly, repurposing components never meant for this environment. Days blurred together. Fatigue became a constant companion. At one point, a storm surged without warning, forcing an emergency retreat to orbit as radiation levels spiked. They lost a drone and nearly lost a crew member when a shielding field failed a fraction of a second too late. Mara sat in the med bay afterward, watching the injured technician breathe steadily under assisted support. She felt the familiar weight of command pressed down, heavier here, far from any shared safety net. "This is what they mean when they say it is not sustainable," Oren said quietly, standing beside her. "Yes," Mara replied, "and this is why we do it anyway." They returned to the surface as soon as conditions allowed. Slowly, painstakingly, the colony stabilized, power grids rebalanced, life support modules came back online. The fabrication arrays began producing replacements for critical systems, tailored to the planet's harsh realities. When it was done, when the colony could stand without constant external support, there was no celebration, just a deep, collective exhale. The colony leader met Mara in person before they departed, gripping her hands with the same intensity she had seen so many times before. "They told us the system would take care of us," the leader said. "It did not." Mara met their gaze. "Systems are tools. They only work when people use them." As the uncounted hands pulled away, setting course back toward more familiar space, Mara stood on the bridge and watched the small world recede into the dark. She felt no triumph, only a quiet certainty. The reach would continue to change. New frameworks would be proposed. Old conflicts would resurface in new forms. Humanity would remain inconvenient, adaptable, and difficult to categorize. That was enough. The gravity of uncounted hands was not something that could be legislated or centralized. It emerged wherever people chose to act without waiting for permission, wherever they accepted responsibility without guarantee of reward. It was present in every patched hull, every shared data stream, every quiet decision to help when help was not efficient. The uncounted hands turned back toward the stars, its course unremarkable, its presence uncelebrated, and in that ordinariness lay its power.